So, just about 2 months ago, I went to Blade Show Atlanta, and it was amazing, and I got to try maybe hundreds of different valleys. And out of everything I tried, thousands of dollars worth of valleys, one of the valleys that impressed me the most was the Fellowship Blades Medusa, and I knew I had to get my hands on one. So when I heard recently there was going to be a Medusa V2 drop on Instagram, I had to get in on it, and I did, and thankfully now I have one of these. So let's talk about it. This is the Fellowship Medusa V2, as I literally just said. Some changes. So this thing is a little bit heavier than the V1, being 4.5 ounces instead of the 4.4. That is in part due to these extra support beams over here and here in the speed channel. This thing is really interesting. The V2 also has an extra milling operation, that hollow grind the top and the hollow grind blade, which has just awesome milling lines, which adds so much to the aesthetic of the blade. The blade also has this logo here, which is one of the most vibrant logos I've seen on a Bally. It's also very present. I don't know how it's done. Might be milled in, or maybe because it's not laser engraved. This is obviously number 37. Specs. So for $525, astonishingly, you get a lot. So the handles are obviously grade 5 titanium, which is essentially the best grade of titanium. And the handles are really light for how beefy they are. And the blade is S35 VN steel, which is very high quality steel and retains an edge really well. Speaking of which, Fellowship sharpens the fuck out of their blades. They actually had 3 different options for sharpness level. The guy's really dope. They had decently sharp, razor sharp, and no sharp. I picked the decently sharp version, and this thing is paper sharp. This thing will rip right through your skin like butter. So I am terrified to know how sharp the razor sharp version is. If the decently sharp version is this sharp, the razor sharp must be actually insane. So, you may see the design of this thing is a little different than most Bally's. First of all, the blade has a really interesting design. It's very beefy and large, and it's pretty thick. Very thick in the back. It's got a crown spine, I believe that's what this is called. No, sorry. It has a flattened back blade, not crowned, which could be good for my preference, but a lot of people don't like that. Now, obviously, the blade is really, really striking. It's very cool to look at, and the handles are really the same. Now, even though this thing is very large for a Bally, it's not as heavy as you would expect due to these really, really large speed channels on top, which are really well chamfered, so it doesn't feel too sharp. Now, the edges over here are also chamfered, so it feels sort of round when you're flipping it, which is really nice. Now, this thing is a really good flipper. It's not conventionally good, like something like a Kraken or a Prisma, where you would want to competitively flip with this thing, but it is a fun flipper, and it is a good feeling flipper. Now, what I mean by that is the tolerances are very, very good. So it has a really tight feeling when you're flipping it, and I can't quite describe what it feels like to flip a knife with good tolerances, but something like a Serif or this knife, it feels so nice, and it just moves so tightly. Now, this thing has nearly perfect tolerances. It's got no play whatsoever, no tap whatsoever. The play is really nearly non-existent. Not as crazy as something by machine-wise, but very good. This thing is super, super ringy. Something like a Gale, it's a little bit more ringy, but you can definitely hear that ring, especially when you close it. Now, I don't know why, but the V2, I think the Zen pins are a little different, but the closing is a little more muted than the V1, which I actually like. This thing is not as outwardly loud as something like a Telesto or a Kraken or a Serif, but it still has that nut factor you would want from a Bally. What else? This thing has hardened steel pivots and a washer, and I think it has phosphorus bronze washers. These pivots are T15, which is really nice. It means they won't strip very easily. And they are really cool. He makes them himself, Fellowship. I think his name is Grant or something, but don't quote me on that. Really, really cool pivots. These will not strip on you as long as you use the right pivots. The right torque. So these supports are really, really good for this blade, since you would think it would be pretty soft with how small these beams are over here. But this thing is tough. I don't personally beat it, but this thing would make a fantastic beater with how chunky and just tough in general this thing is. Just a few gripes real quick. I don't have a lot of problems with this thing, but there are a few. First of all, sometimes when you're flipping this thing for a long period of time, it gets a teeny bit slippery, and the finish on the handles and just in general the texture is not the best. Sometimes it'll get a little slippery around here. In the front, you don't have that option because of you don't have that problem because of the chamfers, but it gets very slippery on the side here. Another problem. This jimping does absolutely nothing. It's kind of cracking jimping. It's it's not very deep at all, and it's just not very present, and does not help with ladders that much. So I'm really bad at ladders. Altogether, this thing is really dope. This review is not going to be the longest, but I did put some effort into it, so let's roll backshot. So the question is, do I recommend the Fellowship Blades Medusa to just anybody? The answer is probably no. To be honest, this thing is really weird, and you need to have a very specific preference to like this thing, since it is very slightly blade bias and just has a weird feeling to it. But if that's what you like, and you're willing to spend the money on this thing, you will really enjoy it. It is a fun flipper. Just in general, good bally. 9 out of 10. See y'all next time.